What's up, guys? Brett Okamoto from ESPN, and thank you for joining one of our end-of-year videos of 2021. It is myself and my colleague, Marc Raimondi of ESPN. We are doing 3 of these videos, one on the fights we hope to see in 2022, one of them on Conor McGregor, just what happens to Conor McGregor in 2022. And then this one, the one you were tuned into, is the biggest storylines of 2021, and then looking ahead, the biggest storylines we anticipate of 2022. So, Marc, nice to see you. Thank you for hopping on here with me. Let's jump right into it on the top 3 storylines of 2021. I want to hear your 3, then I will give my 3, and we'll talk about our choices. So I don't know your choices. We haven't talked about them off camera beforehand. So let's hear them.
So I'm starting with number 3, then moving down to 1. Is we're going to build that suspense.
That's how to do
it. Get excited.
Only way to do it.
So my number 3 selection is the UFC back in front of fans. I think it feels like it was such a long time ago, but it was really only back in April at UFC 251 where fans were back. 261 where fans were back in the building in Jacksonville. You were there. I actually was not able to make it out to that one, but that was a huge story, one of the biggest stories of the year, because when 2021 started, there were still a lot of questions about COVID-19. And look, there still are a lot of questions about coronavirus, but one of the big questions coming into the year was, when would the UFC get back in front of fans? When would fans return? And it was an amazing card. It was, kind of Kamaru Usman put an exclamation point on it with the knockout of Jorge Masvidal. The fans in the building were extremely ecstatic. It was a crazy crowd, energetic crowd in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was in some ways, historic, fans back in the building. It was definitely after more than a year, man. I mean, I think part of me feels like that's a long time ago, because I want to put that year 2020 as far back into my memory as I possibly can. But April was not that long ago. And that was the first time that we had fans back at a UFC fight in over a year. And I think that's one of the biggest stories of 2021, bar none.
Okay. So as your number 3, go ahead and give us your next 2.
Okay. So I had some trouble coming up with these, but I want to, I do want to point out, maybe it's not quite an MMA story, but I do feel like the whole gimmick novelty boxing craze that has, become just a strange, subgenre, I guess you'd call it, in combat sports, Brett. I'm not sure how you characterize it, but it's permeated MMA. It really has, because Jake Paul fought Ben Askren back in April. He fought Tyron Woodley twice this year. Jake Paul has taken aim at just about every popular UFC fighter there is, and as well as UFC President Dana White, who he's gone after several times in interviews. And it seems like he is making part of his story, of his career story, that he's taking on these UFC fighters or former UFC fighters like Tyron Woodley. He wants to fight next year. Everybody, he mentioned, I was just in Tampa a few weeks ago, Brett, for the second fight against Woodley, which Paul won with an emphatic knockout, by the way. And Jorge Masvidal was there in the front row. On the other side of the ring, Nate Diaz was there. This is a story that I think has permeated MMA. Anderson Silva has fought in boxing this year. He looked actually really good against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and Tito Ortiz, knocking out Tito Ortiz in pretty impressive fashion. So, and also, if you want to throw in the whole, Triller thing with the Triad Combat and Frank Mir, and now Junior Dos Santos, I believe, is going to go into boxing. Boxing has kind of been a weird, sub note a little bit in MMA this year, because a lot of former UFC fighters, a lot of guys with names, are going over into that realm and, making some money there and fighting in some, some would say intriguing matchups. Some would say not so intriguing matchups. Vitor Belfort versus Evander Holyfield. But it's been a big part of the year, I think. I think it's one of the biggest stories of the year, for better or for worse. And I think it's going to continue into 2022. But it's definitely, I think, become a weird part of mixed martial arts somehow.
Yeah, without a doubt. So you got fans and you got boxing. What is your number 1 story of last year?
My number 1 story of 2021 was, and this is, again, I had a hard time coming up with the right one, but I do think that going into the year, we had Amanda Nunes, who was the biggest women's star in the sport. She seemed like she was, impenetrable, invincible. No one thought she could win. and that she could lose a fight again. And she was the double champion, bantamweight, featherweight. She had won 12 in a row. And at the end of the year, last pay-per-view of the year, she's knocked off by Julianna Pena, who really no one gave a chance. And I know that in the immediate aftermath of the fight, people were saying, well, is that really the biggest upset in UFC history? Maybe it wasn't the biggest upset in UFC history, Brett, but it was pretty damn close. I don't know many people in that building outside of Julianna Pena, her coach, Rick Little, her team. I don't think anyone really thought that she was going to win that fight except for them. And she did. And not only that, she finished Nunes. She choked her out and she walked her down. And it was just a surreal experience being in the building for that, because I think everyone thought that we had Nunes as this, unstoppable champion. We're already talking about fights with Kayla Harris, and we're talking about a trilogy with Valentina Shevchenko and Julianna Pena, who is someone who, missed a lot of time due to the birth of her daughter, missed a lot of time because she tore up her knee a few years ago. She was really an underdog, since she won The Ultimate Fighter. She's lost her fair share of fights, lost to Jermaine Durandamy, but she came back. She won against Sarah McMahon earlier in the year, and then she knocked off Amanda Nunes. And that is, I don't know if that's my number one story of the year, but it's definitely one of my top 3 biggest stories of the year.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense to me. And when I look at my list, I almost feel like I missed fans, because how often are we ever going to see a global pandemic take out fans and then fans return? So that seems like an obvious one. I don't have it on my top 3, but I probably should. Here's what I went with my top 3. Number 3, I did Kayla Harrison, which coming into this year, I don't think I would have said that, because Kayla Harrison did what we expected her to do, right? She dominated competition that is frankly just not on her level, right? So how can she be one of the biggest stories of the year? I think because you look at now the interest that she's getting from other promotions. You have Dana White talking about the fact that the Julianna Pena upset may have cost them millions of dollars, with the biggest women's fight of all time, and Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison. I just think what she managed to do outside of the UFC, which is hard to do, the amount of buzz that she was able to create, and the interest that she has built in herself, and this path that now she has different options, and I think chances are she could stay at PFL, but the fact that she has created so much interest and so many options for herself, to me, that's number 3 biggest story of the year. Number 2 for me was Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier. Coming into this year, there were so many different ways that Conor McGregor could have gone. He was favored to beat Dustin Poirier in the first fight in January. Had he won that fight, what could he have done? I mean, would he have boxed Manny Pacquiao? Maybe, probably even. Like there was things in the works there for him to box Manny Pacquiao. He could have fought for a lightweight championship. Instead, the guy has lost twice, didn't look that great doing either one of them, and suffered a leg injury. So I think when you're talking about the sport of mixed martial arts, Conor McGregor is always as big as the sport itself, it seems like. So how can you say that kind of guy having that type of year, and what it sets up potentially for next year, and is he going to look the same, and where does he go from here? I think that to me is the number 2 story of the year. Dustin Poirier, finally paid in full, getting the money that he always deserved, having that kind of year that he had, coming so close to knocking out Charles Oliveira and winning the championship. So I'm kind of combining the two, but the Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier, that dynamic between the two was my number 2 story of 2021. And then number 1,
if Poirier, sorry to interrupt you, Brett. If Poirier had beaten Oliveira for the title, he's the number 1 story of the year, because that's one of the best years in the history of the UFC. You beat Conor McGregor twice, then you win the title at the end of the year. I mean, just historic. But of course, this is MMA, and things don't always go as planned. Of course, congrats to Charles Oliveira, who is a very deserving champion, and also a pretty darn good story too this year. Maybe that's your number 1, but I'll let you wrap it up.
Oliveira is not my number 1. My number 1 is Jake Paul, man. When the fans came back in April, when you were talking about,
yes,
they were chanting the name Jake Paul. I mean, and I didn't know how long this was going to last. It looks like it's going to continue to last quite further. I will say, and people probably know this if they follow me on social media, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in it personally, but I got nothing against it. I think Jake Paul has been brilliant in everything that he's done, and the way in which the industry is paying attention to it. I mean, Mark, and fans probably know this as well, but I will tell you, people in the industry are paying attention to this. It is no coincidence that Jorge Masvidal is there, and then he's dropping videos on it afterwards. Nate Diaz is talking about the guy, saying like, let's just be friends. You don't want any piece of me. Like, they're all kind of eyeballing it. They're circling the wagons a little bit. Jake Paul has their attention. And so I think whether or not Dana White wants to admit it, it's kind of impacting his business. It's impacting conversations that are going on about his contract negotiations. So somehow, man, Jake Paul is the number one story in MMA in 2021. I don't know if that's sad or happy or controversial or what, but that is my opinion. So real quickly, we will go through into the biggest stories that we anticipate 2022.
I just want to shout out one more thing that I just thought of that we should probably cover in our top stories of 2021. Not sure how I didn't think of it, but how about the year that Trevor Whitman and his team had? Kamaru Usman going 3-0, was champion, looked damn good, looked better than ever this year, pound for pound best fighter in the world. I think both of us would agree with that. Rose Namajunas regaining the title, the UFC women's strawweight title, beating Zhang Weili, then winning the rematch in a great fight in New York. And then Justin Gaethje doing Justin Gaethje things, beating Michael Chandler in that just absolutely insane fight again at MSG. And Whitman coached three fighters, 3-0 that night in New York. I think that Whitman and Gaethje and Rose and Usman deserve a little bit of a shout as some of the most interesting things that happened in MMA this year.
For sure. Yeah. It feels like a long time ago, but Kamaru beating Gilbert Burns and showing the improvements that he's made in his boxing with Trevor Whitman was a big story to kick off the year. And then he finishes the year in Madison Square Garden, beating Colby Covington for the second time. So absolutely. Okay. 2022. And we'll do this quick, Mark. 3 stories you got your eye on in order. Yes. 3, 2, 1. What are you looking at?
Okay. So starting from 3.
Yep.
Well, I think that the one that really, it was kind of it was like a story, non-story in 2021. And that was Jon Jones. Yep. Because he was expected to fight. He's been talking about going to heavyweight. He was setting up for it. I spoke to Jon, I think it was either December 2020 or January 2021. And he was all set to fight, in June, July, August, in the summer, heavyweight title. And it just didn't happen. And it didn't happen for a variety of reasons, one of which was kind of the flux that the UFC heavyweight division is going into, with Ngannou beating Stipe Miocic. Then Ngannou was supposed to, or at least the UFC wanted him to fight Derek Lewis in August. He couldn't make that fight. He was visiting Cameroon, his home country. And Cyril Gane got kind of wedged into the interim title fight against Derek Lewis. Gane won that fight, setting up, a fight that I think everyone is really excited about, Ngannou versus Gane, that's former teammates for the heavyweight title. But it's kind of almost left Jon Jones as the odd man out, which no one expected going into the year. I don't think that will be the case anymore going to 2022. Of course, Jon's own personal issues contributed. He was arrested in September, ended up pleading nolo contendere to that, and he didn't get any jail time. But that also did not help his case in 2021. But I do think we'll be hearing a lot more from Jones in 2022. I do think we'll finally see him in heavyweight, and it probably will be in a title fight. And look, in a few months, we could be talking about Jon Jones becoming the heavyweight champion of the UFC after that long, nearly decade of holding the UFC light heavyweight title, cementing his status as the greatest of all time. That could be the big conversation going into, the summer or thereafter. That could be the big story of the year, actually. So I think that's one that we want to look out for.
Okay. And your last 2?
My number 2 is I think one of the things that we got to look out for is the contract situations, which you had mentioned about Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor. I think that's a really important one. Nate Diaz has 1 fight left. What happens next? Who does he fight? And then what happens? Does he leave as a free agent? Does the UFC pony up? Like, how does that work out? If he leaves, what does he do? Does he box? Does he do an MMA fight against somebody? Does he go fight for Triller? I don't know. Does he go fight in the Triad? I have no clue. It could be anything. And then McGregor has 2 fights left on his contract. I don't know if he'll fight both of them in 2022, but I would imagine once his leg heals, he said he's going to be cleared to spar in April. I would imagine he's going to try to get those 2 fights in 2022 as well. So we could be looking at arguably 2 of the biggest stars in the UFC, certainly 2 of the biggest stars in the UFC becoming free agents in 2022. That's a big story.
Yep. And then your number 1 story to keep an eye on next year.
And then my number 1 story for next year was somewhat of your top story for this year. And it's sort of in a way. And I think that's who is anyone big, is a big name going to leave the UFC to go to boxing. And I mentioned Diaz and McGregor, but I think the number 1 story is still, there are other people who could do that too. Francis Ngannou is in a contract I guess, impasse with the UFC is what I would call it at this point. Maybe he leaves to go box. Maybe someone else does. I'm not sure how many fights Jorge Masvidal has on his contract, but Jake Paul is out there. He's calling out everyone, as we mentioned, and I think that is something that could very realistically happen in 2022, whether someone leaves the UFC to go box Jake Paul or someone leaves the UFC to go box someone else or to do an MMA fight or something like that. But who's going to jump ship to go box in 2022? I think that's probably the biggest story, at least looking ahead right now.
Yeah, our answers are very similar, and each of my answers is a specific fighter. Number 3 was the same as yours, Jon Jones. Has an argument for greatest of all time, but has been obviously very inactive. When you go back and look at his most recent fights, even though they were, not that recent, wasn't super dominant in them. There were arguments that he lost some of them. So, you chalk up moving up a division, inactivity, the fact that he was losing dominance already at light heavyweight. It builds up this giant question mark around Jon Jones that hopefully we see answered in 2022. Number 2 is Francis Ngannou. He has got a big time fight in January. We'll be talking about this as the fight gets closer. It's a very unique situation that a champion is going in without any fights left on his contract afterwards. If he loses, he's a free agent. Well, a restricted free agent, obviously UFC would have an opportunity to match any offer that he gets. But this is different. This is rare. This is unique. Francis has talked about it. His manager, Markel Martin, has talked about it. It is I used the phrase earlier that the industry is paying attention to this. They are paying attention to what happens with Francis Ngannou. And I think it's just a fascinating story. You got the guy who, if you ask the UFC, if you could just mold somebody to build the sport around for a while, it would look like Francis Ngannou, right? A heavyweight athletic with unreal knockout power, and they just have not been able to see eye to eye. So it'll be super interesting to see what happens in that fight and then how it impacts Ngannou's career moving forward, whether that's with the UFC or without the UFC. And then number 1 for me, I hate to go with the obvious answer, but it's Conor McGregor. Like I said earlier, this guy is as big as the sport itself. He is coming off of a year in which he lost 2 fights, did not look particularly good in either one of them. And now he's coming off of a major injury. He's got options. He always will. But who does he fight and how does he look? And what does that mean for his future, whether it's in the UFC or not? That is going to be a massive storyline. I'm telling you right now, Mark, at the end of next year, we're going to be talking about what happened with Conor McGregor, right? We're going to be saying either he won or he lost, either he re-signed with UFC or he did not. Where is he going? What does that mean for the sport? What does that mean for Conor McGregor? So it's the easy answer, but it is the correct answer. That is going to be the biggest story, what happens with Conor McGregor in 2022. So that is it for the stories of 2021, 2022. If you want to hear more actually about our thoughts on Conor McGregor, we are doing a separate video on YouTube, as I mentioned earlier, just talking about what kind of year he might have, some of our predictions, some of our thoughts on what's going to happen with Conor over the next 12 months. So give that a look at ESPN MMA YouTube channel. Enjoy the holidays, enjoy the new year, and we will see you in 2022.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.